My name is Daniel Walker. I am 62 years old, a retired construction engineer, and a widower living in a quiet suburb outside Austin, Texas. For more than 3 decades, I carried bricks, studied blueprints late into the night, and supervised crews under the blazing Texas sun. It was hard, often exhausting work, but it gave me one thing that mattered more than anything else in this world: the chance to provide a stable home for my family. When my wife, Sarah, passed away 8 years ago, that home felt emptier than I could ever describe. The walls still carried her laughter. The kitchen still smelled of her baking, yet the silence became deafening. In that silence, I poured every ounce of my being into raising our only son, Michael. He was my anchor, the reason I woke up each morning with purpose. He was 29 now, no longer the little boy who used to tug at my sleeve during Sunday church, but in my eyes, he would always be that child I had promised to protect. This Thanksgiving, I wanted it to be different. I wanted it to feel whole again. I woke early, before the first light crept over the Texas hills, and drove into town to buy a 12-pound turkey. I picked the brightest orange pumpkins for the pie, and even dusted off a bottle of Napa Valley red wine I had been saving for years. The wine wasn't just for drinking, it was for a toast. A moment to raise our glasses and remember that, despite all life had taken from us, we were still a family. On the counter, I set down a small wooden box. Inside lay an heirloom passed down from my father, a gold pocket watch, its surface scratched by time, but its ticking heart as steady as ever. That watch had been through wars, through decades of struggle, and yet it survived. To me, it was more than just an object. It was a symbol, a reminder that time is precious, that it should be spent on love, not resentment. I had decided that tonight, in front of Michael and his girlfriend Emily, I would place that watch into his hands. A gesture not only of tradition, but of trust, of my unwavering faith in him as the man of the next generation. As I basted the turkey and slid it into the oven, the scent of rosemary and garlic filled the house, flooding my memory with past Thanksgivings. I could almost see Sarah again, standing by the stove with her apron dusted in flour, shaking her head at my clumsy way of chopping onions. I could hear Michael's childish laugh as he circled the table, waiting for the golden brown turkey skin. Back then, the house wasn't just full of food, it was full of warmth, of joy, of promises for the future. This year, I wanted that warmth back. I set the table with care, white linens, polished silverware, candles flickering in the center. Every place setting was perfect, every glass spotless. I imagined the three of us, Michael, Emily, and me, sitting together, sharing a meal, sharing gratitude. In my mind, I could see Michael raising his glass, thanking me for everything I had sacrificed. I could see Emily smiling, perhaps even shedding a tear at the thought of love that endures beyond loss. And then I imagined the moment when I would open that wooden box, slide it across the table, and watch Michael's eyes light up at the sight of the pocket watch. In that instant, I thought, he would finally understand. He would understand the decades of labor, the nights I stayed awake balancing bills, the times I gave up my own dreams so that he could chase his. He would see not just a watch, but a father's devotion etched into every tick. The truth is, I had sacrificed more than I ever admitted out loud. When Michael struggled with tuition during college, I sold my old pickup truck to cover his debt. When he got tangled in credit card trouble, I pulled money from my retirement savings to clear his name. He once hugged me, tears in his eyes, and whispered, "Dad, I'll never forget what you've done for me." Those words carried me through the darkest nights. They made me believe that love and sacrifice were enough, that someday he would repay me not with money, but with respect. So, yes, I was tired. My body ached more with each passing winter. But this Thanksgiving, I was filled with hope. Hope that tonight would not only be a meal, but a turning point. Hope that Michael would see me not just as his aging father, but as the man who had stood by him every step of the way. As I stood back, surveying the table, the candles glowing against the polished wood, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: peace. For the first time in a long time, I believed everything was going to be all right. What I didn't know was that just a few hours later, every ounce of that hope would shatter. The turkey was still roasting in the oven when I stepped out back to check if the chairs on the patio were ready. That's when I heard voices. At first, I thought nothing of it. Michael always laughed loud when he was with his friends. But then the words reached me. "Honestly," Michael said, his voice sharp, "the best gift my old man could ever give me is to disappear from my life." Laughter exploded. His friends roared, one of them clapping him on the back like he had just told the joke of the century. Even Emily was there, her arms folded, smiling thinly. She didn't stop him. She didn't defend me. She just stood there, smirking, as if my existence were a nuisance to be mocked. My chest tightened. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I gripped the pie plate in my hands so hard my knuckles turned white. The pumpkin pie I had baked that morning wobbled, nearly slipped from my fingers. Did I hear that right? Did my own son really say that? I froze where I stood, half hidden by the sliding door. My ears rang. The voices around me blurred, but his words kept slicing through the air like knives. He continued, his tone bitter, proud. "He thinks throwing money at me makes up for everything. He thinks paying bills buys love. But I don't need him. I don't need his rules. I just want him gone." The laughter came again, louder this time, cruel. Each chuckle was a nail driven deeper into my chest. I stood there, trembling, the smell of roasted turkey drifting from the kitchen behind me. The warmth of the house felt like it had evaporated. The holiday I had spent hours preparing for had turned into a stage where my son played the lead role, mocking me in front of his audience. 29 years of sacrifice, reduced to a punchline. I saw his friends leaning in, nodding, one of them saying, "Man, you should have cut ties years ago." And Michael, my Michael, smiled, a cold, satisfied smile. I wanted to storm outside, to shout, to demand, "How dare you?" But my feet stayed glued to the floor. Instead, I listened, my heart hammering in my chest, as my son tore me apart piece by piece. I thought of the pickup truck I sold to cover his tuition. I thought of the nights I stayed awake, running numbers on a notepad, wondering how I'd keep the lights on while still paying his bills. I thought of Sarah, how she used to whisper that Michael would grow into a good man, a grateful man. But the man outside was not the boy we raised. My hands shook so violently I nearly dropped the pie again. My mouth went dry. My ears buzzed with the sound of betrayal. I had imagined him holding the pocket watch tonight, cherishing it. Now all I could see was his laughter, derisive, empty, cruel. Emily finally spoke. "Well," she said softly, "maybe he just doesn't know when to let go." The others chuckled. Michael grinned wider. "He'll figure it out," Michael said. "One way or another, he'll figure it out." The word struck me harder than any physical blow ever could. For a moment, the world tilted. My vision blurred. I felt like the ground beneath me was crumbling, leaving me standing on nothing but regret. I pressed my back against the doorframe to steady myself. My heart pounded so loudly I was afraid they'd hear it. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. Instead, I stood in silence, listening to my own son bury me with words I could never take back. Time seemed to stop. Every second stretched like an eternity. The laughter outside faded, but the echo of his voice remained. Disappear from my life. That's all he wanted. Disappear. I felt the sting of tears at the corners of my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Not yet. Not in front of him. Not in front of the world. I turned away from the sliding door, clutching the pie dish like a lifeline. My legs felt weak, like they might give out at any moment. I stumbled back into the kitchen, the warm air wrapping around me. Though it no longer felt comforting, it felt suffocating. The table was set perfectly. The candles flickered. The wine glistened in its bottle. Yet everything looked foreign now, as if it belonged to another family, one that deserved to be together. I leaned against the counter, staring blankly at the wooden box with the pocket watch. My father's legacy. My legacy. I had wanted to pass it down tonight, to trust my son with it. But what trust remained? What bond was left between us? In that moment, grief twisted into something else. It wasn't just sadness anymore. It was something darker, sharper. Inside me, a new resolve began to stir. And right then, I knew. A decision was forming. I sat alone in the dining room, staring at the table I had so carefully prepared. The turkey sat in the center, golden brown, its skin glistening under the soft glow of candlelight. The pumpkin pie rested neatly on a tray, untouched. The wine bottle gleamed, unopened, waiting for a celebration that would never come. But no one was here. The chairs remained empty. The silence around me was suffocating, broken only by the faint echo of laughter drifting in from the backyard. Laughter that did not include me. Laughter that cut deeper than any blade could. I lowered myself into one of the chairs, my body heavy with a weariness I hadn't felt before. I rested my hands on the polished wood of the table, hands that had built houses, bridges, and roads, hands that had built this house, brick by brick. And yet, here I was, a stranger in the very home I had created. My eyes wandered across the table settings. Every fork aligned, every napkin folded with precision. I had prepared it not just for a meal, but for a memory. A chance to bring us together again, to remind Michael of the family he still had. But instead, it mocked me. The table became a symbol of something cruel, the illusion of togetherness. I leaned back and closed my eyes. My mind betrayed me, pulling me into the past. I remembered a Thanksgiving long ago, Sarah alive, bustling around the kitchen with her apron tied loosely, humming to herself as she stirred gravy. Michael was just a boy, no more than 8, his cheeks flushed with excitement as he helped set the table. He kept sneaking pieces of cornbread when he thought we weren't looking, crumbs scattered across his shirt. We laughed together, we prayed together, we ate until we couldn't move, and afterward, Sarah and I sat on the porch watching Michael chase fireflies in the cool November night. Back then, this house was filled with warmth, with love, with promise. Now, all I felt was cold. The warmth was gone, replaced by the sting of betrayal. The boy who once clung to me when he had nightmares had grown into a man who mocked me behind my back. The son Sarah and I had raised with love and sacrifice now saw me as nothing but an obstacle. The voices outside grew louder. Michael's laugh rose above the rest, sharp and cruel. I could almost see him, standing tall in front of his friends, boasting about how little he needed me, and Emily, standing beside him, letting the poison drip from his tongue unchecked. I gripped the edge of the table. My knuckles ached. My throat burned with the words I wanted to shout but couldn't. How did we get here? How did I become invisible in my own home? The humiliation pressed down on me like a weight. I was not just excluded, I was erased. My sacrifices, my love, my identity as a father, all dismissed with a smirk and a laugh. I glanced at the wooden box sitting by the wine glasses. The pocket watch gleamed faintly through the open lid. For years, I had imagined this moment, passing it down, watching Michael accept it with pride. Instead, it sat there like a cruel reminder of how far we had fallen, a symbol of a legacy he no longer cared for. I bowed my head, fighting back tears. My chest heaved as if I were carrying the burden of the entire room. Shame filled me. Shame that I had believed this night could heal us. Shame that I had been blind to the truth, that Michael no longer saw me as a father, but as a joke. The laughter outside drifted in again, stabbing at me with every sound. It was a chorus of betrayal, each note louder, harsher, more merciless than the last. I felt small, insignificant, like a shadow fading against the glow of the candles. For the first time in my life, I understood what it meant to be truly alone, not alone because of death or distance, but alone because the person you love most has chosen to cast you aside. I clenched my fists, pressing them against the tablecloth, as if grounding myself in the pain. The humiliation was unbearable, but beneath it, something else began to stir. Anger. Not the wild, uncontrolled anger of a young man, but a simmering fire, quiet and steady. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to breathe. My heart pounded, but my voice remained trapped in my chest. I wanted to storm outside, to confront him in front of everyone, to reclaim my dignity. But I knew that moment had not yet come. So I sat there, humiliated, crushed, but not defeated. I swallowed the shame, let it burn through me, and buried it deep inside. And in that silence, I made myself a promise. I would endure this humiliation tonight. But that did not mean I would endure it forever. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, gripping the edges of the sink. The man staring back at me wasn't the same one who had sat quietly at the table an hour earlier. His shoulders were no longer hunched. His eyes no longer pleaded for understanding. This man's eyes were sharp, cold, steady, for years. I had bent under the weight of sacrifice. I had endured disrespect, thinking patience would heal what was broken. Tonight, something inside me snapped. I was no longer the father who begged for scraps of gratitude. I straightened my back. For the first time in a long while, I looked at myself and didn't see weakness. I saw clarity. I left the mirror and walked to the study. My footsteps were firm, deliberate, echoing across the hardwood floor. At the far corner stood a heavy, steel safe, one I hadn't opened in years. I knelt, spun the dial, and felt the old familiar clicks fall into place. The door swung open. Inside lay the documents that represented a lifetime of labor, the deed to the house, the bank records, retirement funds, insurance papers. My entire life reduced to ink and signatures. I pulled them out one by one, spread them across the desk. My fingers lingered on the deed to this house, the same house Michael had mocked me in, the same house he felt entitled to. My father's words came back to me, clear as if he were standing beside me. Time is the one thing you can never buy back. He was right. I had wasted too much of it hoping Michael would change. Tonight proved he never would. I picked up the phone. My hands no longer trembled. I scrolled through my contacts until I found the name I needed. Richard Hayes, attorney at law, Houston, an old friend, a man I trusted. He answered on the second ring. "Daniel, it's been a while." "Yes," I said, my voice even calm. "And I need your help." "What kind of help?" I looked down at the papers spread across the desk. The life I had built. The life my son thought he could inherit by default. "I want to sell the house," I said, "and I want it done quickly." There was silence on the line, then a low whistle. "Big decision? Are you sure?" I closed my eyes for a moment. In my mind, I heard Michael's words again. The best gift he could give me is to disappear. "I'm sure," I replied. "Draw up the paperwork. I'll come to Houston this week." We discussed logistics, buyers, timelines, legal details. I barely heard him. My focus was sharp, locked onto one thing: freedom. When I ended the call, I sat in the silence of the study. The laughter outside had faded, but the echo of betrayal still hung in the air. Only now. It didn't crush me. It fueled me. I stacked the papers neatly, slid them back into a folder, and locked the safe again. But this time, the weight on my shoulders felt lighter. I turned off the lamp and stood in the dark room, listening to the faint ticking of the pocket watch inside the wooden box on the dining table. Time was moving forward, and so was I. They wanted me gone. They would get exactly what they wished for, but not in the way they expected. I would vanish from their lives, leave them with nothing but the echo of my absence. No roof, no support, no safety net. Michael wanted independence. He would choke on it. I walked back to the bathroom and glanced once more at my reflection. The tired old man was gone. In his place stood someone else, someone who had made peace with the cost of letting go. The humiliation of earlier was still there, buried deep, but it no longer weakened me. It hardened me. It became the fire in my chest, steady and unyielding. This was no longer about sorrow. This was about reclaiming dignity. I stepped into the hallway, the house silent around me, the air heavy with the smell of roasted turkey that would never be eaten. I paused by the table where the candle still flickered, where the pocket watch still waited. I closed the wooden box and slid it into my jacket. It would not go to Michael, not tonight, maybe not ever. As I turned off the lights, a strange calm settled over me. The decision had been made. The path was clear. And I knew this was only the beginning. This was the first step in a plan that would change everything. 2 days later, the storm came. Michael barged into the house without knocking, his voice booming through the hallway before I even had the chance to stand. "What the hell is this, Dad?" he shouted, waving his phone in the air. "My debit cards declined. My phone service is cut off. What did you do?" I stood in the living room, calm, almost cold. "I did exactly what I should have done years ago," I said. "I stopped paying for you." His face twisted with rage. "You can't just cut me off. You owe me. This house, this money. It's mine too." I laughed bitterly. "Owe you? For what? For 29 years I fed you, clothed you, paid every debt you racked up. And you dare stand here and call it yours?" His fists clenched at his sides. His voice rose. "I've given up everything because of you. I've been stuck under your control all my life." I stepped closer, my eyes locked on his. "Control? That's what you call sacrifice? You call the nights I sold my truck to keep you in school control? You call saving your credit score control? You've lived off me like a parasite, Michael. That's not independence. That's dependence wearing a mask." For a moment, he faltered. His jaw tightened, his eyes flickering with something, shame, maybe. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared. Emily walked in then, her heels clicking across the hardwood. She folded her arms, lips pursed in disdain. "Michael deserves better than this," she said coldly. "He's 30. He deserves to be treated like a man. You've had your time. You're old. It's time to let go." Her words sliced deep, but I didn't let them see the wound. I turned my gaze back to Michael. "So this is what you've been feeding on, her whispers, her promises. She tells you you're entitled, and you believe her?" Emily's chin lifted defiantly. "It's not entitlement when it's rightfully his. He's your son. He should inherit everything. We've already talked about it. It's only fair that the deed—" She hesitated, but the slip was already out. "The deed," I repeated slowly. My voice dropped, low and heavy. "So that's what this is about." Michael's eyes widened, then narrowed, anger overtaking caution. "Yes, that's exactly what it's about. We've been planning it for months. Emily and I agreed. It's time the house is in my name. You've had your run, Dad. Now it's mine." The confession hit me like a blow, though by now I should have expected it. I straightened, towering over him, my voice steady but laced with fury. "You plotted to take my house, my life's work, the roof your mother and I built, the walls that sheltered you, the floor you crawled on as a baby. You would strip that from me?" Michael sneered. "It's not stripping. It's claiming what should have been mine all along. Everyone knows it." "Everyone?" I barked. "No, Michael. Everyone knows nothing. Only you and that woman standing beside you, whispering in your ear like poison." Emily's eyes flashed. "Poison? You think truth is poison? You're the one clinging to power like some tyrant. You're suffocating him." I stepped forward, inches from Michael, my finger pointing directly at his chest. I gave you life. I gave you everything. And this is how you repay me, by conspiring to rob me while I'm still breathing? His face reddened, veins rising on his neck. You never gave me freedom. That's all I wanted. Freedom from your control, from your expectations. You think money buys loyalty? It doesn't. You think you can dangle love like a paycheck? You can't. I stared at him, my heart pounding, my voice breaking into a growl. You call this freedom? Freedom built on betrayal? Freedom that spits on your mother's grave? The room went silent. The weight of my words hung between us like a blade. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then Emily broke the silence. Michael, she whispered, we don't need him anymore. He's finished. Soon. The house will be ours. Just hold your ground. Michael nodded, his eyes hard, unyielding. And in that instant, I knew something irrevocable had happened. A line had been crossed. There would be no going back. The son I had raised, the boy I once carried on my shoulders, had become a man I no longer recognized. I drew a long breath, my voice low but cutting. You've made your choice, Michael, and after today, nothing will ever be the same again. The envelope came on a gray Thursday morning. No knock on the door, no warning, just the sharp scrape of mail sliding through the slot. I bent down to pick it up, already sensing what it might be. My name printed neatly across the front. The seal of a law office in Houston stamped in the corner. I opened it slowly, carefully, as though delaying the inevitable would soften the blow. Inside, a letter on thick paper, words typed in a language colder than ice. Michael Walker versus Daniel Walker. A petition, a demand. My own son had filed for division of property, claiming his rightful inheritance. He wasn't waiting for me to die. He wanted his share now, while I was still alive, still breathing. He was dragging me into court, reducing father and son to plaintiff and defendant. For a long time, I just sat there, the paper trembling in my hand. My throat burned, but no sound came out. The silence of the house pressed down on me. This house, the beams overhead that I had inspected myself, the walls I had painted alongside Sarah, the floors Michael had taken his first steps on. Every inch of it built with sweat, sacrifice, love, and now it was evidence, a bargaining chip, a prize my son thought he could win. I wandered through the rooms, the letter still clutched between my fingers. The dining table remained as I had left it days before, half cleared. Candles burned down to nubs. The smell of roasted turkey lingered faintly in the air, stale now, almost rancid. What had once promised warmth now carried the stench of abandonment. I paused in the living room, staring at the photographs still hanging on the wall. Sarah's smile, frozen in time. Michael, at 10 years old, holding up a baseball glove too big for his hand. His gap-toothed grin. My arms slung around him, proud. The boy in that photo and the man in the courtroom filing were not the same person. Somewhere between then and now, I had lost him. Or maybe he had lost himself. The memories swarmed me, choking me. I could still hear Sarah's voice echoing in the kitchen, warm and melodic as she called us to dinner. I could still hear Michael's laughter bouncing down the hallway on Christmas morning, Those sounds used to make this house alive. Now, all I heard was silence. A silence that stretched, oppressive, thick. Every tick of the clock in the hallway reminded me of emptiness. Every creak of the floorboards reminded me I was alone. I sank into a chair by the table, the letter lying in front of me like a dagger. My hands moved on their own, reaching into the drawer where I kept a small box. Inside were scraps of memory, cards, old notes, drawings Michael had made when he was a boy. I pulled one out, a letter he had written to me in 3rd grade. The handwriting crooked, the words simple. I love you, Dad. You're my hero. I stared at the words until they blurred through tears. That letter had once been my most cherished treasure, proof that all the sacrifice had been worth it. But now, it felt like a cruel joke, a relic from a boy who no longer existed. My hand trembled as I reached for the lighter on the counter. I held the letter above the flame. For a moment, I hesitated. Then the fire caught. The paper curled, blackened, and turned to ash. I watched as the words, "I love you, Dad," disappeared in smoke. It was more than paper burning. It was the last fragile bridge between us, and I set it ablaze with my own hands. The smell of charred paper lingered in the air, mingling with the faint ghost of turkey and pumpkin pie. Symbols of family, of tradition, of love, all turned sour, all consumed by silence and betrayal. I sat there, motionless, staring at the ashes on the plate. The weight of it crushed me. This wasn't just about money. It wasn't just about a house. It was about everything. Every bond, every memory, every ounce of love we once shared, gone, and in the hollow echo of that moment, I knew the truth. This family, my family, was broken beyond repair. It was shattered, and nothing I could do would ever piece it back together again. The morning after the storm of papers and ashes, I woke before the sun. The house was quiet, still heavy with the scent of smoke from the letter I had burned. Yet for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel crushed by the silence. I brewed a pot of coffee, the aroma filling the kitchen as the first hints of dawn crept across the horizon. Mug in hand, I stepped out onto the front porch. The Texas air was cool, carrying with it the faint smell of cedar and earth. Above the trees, the sky was painted with streaks of orange and pink. I lowered myself into the wooden chair Sarah and I had bought years ago at a flea market. The chair creaked under my weight, but the sound was oddly comforting, a reminder that some things endure even when everything else falls apart. I sipped my coffee slowly, watching the light spread across the fields, the darkness giving way to morning. And as I sat there, I felt something shift inside me. I had lost the son I thought I had. The boy who once called me a hero had grown into a man I no longer recognized. That loss cut deeper than I could ever admit. But in that loss, I had gained something else, something I hadn't realized I'd been missing. My dignity. For years, I had bent, sacrificed, endured, all in the name of fatherhood. I thought love meant giving everything, even when it left me with nothing. But this betrayal forced me to see the truth. Love cannot survive without respect, and a father who allows himself to be humiliated ceases to be a father at all. I took another sip of coffee, letting the warmth spread through me. I realized then that I wasn't bound to this house, these walls, or even this town. My identity was not chained to Michael's choices. That afternoon, I called Richard, my attorney. My voice was steady as I told him, "Sell the house. I want it done within the month." The decision felt final, clean, like cutting a rope that had held me hostage. I would leave Austin, start over in a place where the shadows of betrayal couldn't follow me. Maybe I'd move west, closer to the desert. Maybe north, to the quiet hills. Wherever it was, it would be mine, not his, not ours, but mine. As the sun climbed higher, I sat in stillness, listening to the hum of cicadas, the distant bark of a dog. For once, I didn't feel bitterness. I didn't feel rage. I felt light. The chains had fallen. Yes, I had lost. Lost the image of a perfect son. Lost the dream of a family whole again. But I had won something no one could take from me. Peace. I leaned back in the chair, letting the rising sun warm my face. A faint smile crept across my lips, not of joy, but of acceptance. Because I knew now, this chapter was closed. And as I sat there, I couldn't help but wonder, if your own child turns their back on you, what would you do to keep your dignity? Life doesn't always give us the endings we hope for. Families fracture, promises break. The people we sacrifice for sometimes repay us with betrayal, but endings do not define us. Choices do. I choose peace. I choose to move forward, to free myself from the weight of resentment. I choose to live the rest of my days not as a man shackled by disappointment, but as one who has reclaimed his worth. Yes, I walked away without the son I once dreamed of. But I walked away with something far greater, my self-respect. That is not just survival, that is freedom. If betrayal has touched your life, do not let it destroy you. Do not let it define you. Peace comes not from clinging to what is broken, but from learning to let go. I set down my mug, watching the morning light spill across the porch. A new day had begun, and with it, a new life. And I ask you, if your family turned against you, what would you do to find your peace? If you felt what I've felt, if you've carried burdens like mine, then stay with me. Follow this channel. Together, we will share stories that remind us we are not alone.